Hi, this is Ray Horner, your host of Horner's Corner, of course. It's the month of December, and I thought we would center in on local radio. And what we have in the Akron area is local radio that is done the way radio was, not is. We have an owner of radio stations in the Akron area who believes in local community radio and paying attention to the community. He also happens to be my boss for the last 25 years, but he does radio the way we see the radio stations. He is the owner, the general manager of WONE, WQMX, WAKR, and Alt Cleveland 1073. His name's Thom Mandel, and actually I want to take the words, I'll let him explain. He's kind of living a dream by owning radio stations. Thom, thanks for joining me today.
Well, I wouldn't always call it living a dream, but thank you for the kind words. We have 4 radio stations in Northeast Ohio serving Cleveland and Akron, and one of them is actually a Cleveland station. The other 3 are actually Akron radio stations. And I have the pleasure of having, as one of those stations, WAKR, which is a truly community-focused radio station. It's got a lot of information. It's got lots of local sports. It's got you, and actually a number of other very, very talented people in a major newsroom. And that's something you don't see in too many radio stations anymore. Is a real newsroom with real news people working at it, and we think that's important, especially in an era when newspapers are getting thinner and thinner. We're still out there serving the community and providing the kind of programs that you expect.
I certainly want to get into Thom's belief in radio and being a general manager and owner in the world of radio today in 2024, but maybe talk about how this interest began for you. You and I have often swapped the stories about you working over in Ashtabula County and everything, but where did the love of radio start for you, Thom?
Probably as a very small child. Getting a radio as a gift at the holidays, I suppose. And it probably wasn't much of a radio. It was probably one of those radios you could stick in your pocket, ran on a 9-volt battery. and I was living in South Florida, and out of Miami was a station called WQAM. I think they were on 64, so way down there at the bottom of the dial. And they had a huge signal, and they also rocked and rolled. And so they were really exciting to listen to, and they had some fabulous radio personalities working at the time. And I just fell in love with the music, and that was when rock and roll was starting. And here was a radio station dedicated to it. They don't play music anymore. Now it's a sports talk radio station. But back in the day, early 1960s, they were Tiger Radio, 64 WQAM, and I fell in love with it.
So then you eventually make your way back to the Cleveland area, and as I mentioned, you start to get into radio. I don't know if it was the ground floor, but you started working in radio part-time and falling in love with it in the greater Cleveland area.
I did do that. Probably the biggest thing I did when I was in high school, and I was working as a volunteer at WUJC, which is now WJCU. And they were on the campus of John Carroll University. And I didn't do on-air work, but I did backroom production for them. And we had a number of live music radio programs that we taped around the campus. And I was almost always the engineer on those programs, and I had a blast doing it.
Thom Mandel is with us. He is the owner of the Rubber City Radio Group, general manager, who's also received national awards for his leadership when we talk about the Rubber City Radio Company, and we'll talk about that in a second. So let's fast forward a little bit to when you purchase your first radio stations. That had to be something else. I mean, not only leading a company, but here you go, a guy, as you mentioned, listening to a radio. All of a sudden, you're an owner of a radio station.
In a partnership with Gordon Stenbeck, who had been a radio legend in Cleveland. He was the founder of Zip 106 back in the 70s, I guess it was. Maybe it was the early 80s. But at any rate, he was the guy who invented Zip 106. And he and I partnered on WQMX, which had been an easy listening station out in Medina County. We moved it to Akron and brought it into the 20th century. And originally put soft hits on it, and within a couple of years we switched it over to country music. And the timing was actually pretty good on that because in Akron there had been a country station, but that station had been slipping away. It was an AM station. It didn't have a great signal. It had almost no signal at night. And they had a legendary morning show that was retiring. And so it was a good opportunity to jump in and say, we're country, we're in Akron, we're local, we're on FM, which means you can hear it in stereo, and then the sound was so much better. And almost immediately the country station in Cleveland started coming down here trying to defend what they thought was their territory. And being local is what helped us push them back above Route 303.
And we can talk now about one thing that Thomas certainly, and he mentioned the country music, hung his hat on, and that's being live and local with WQMX. And Tom is a firm believer in local radio. His stations really give back to the community, and QMX, WONE, WAKR, 107.3. Tom really believes in live local community involvement. And in the world today, in radio today, Tom, you're, I don't want to say the minority, but many people, conglomerates, don't necessarily believe in local, live and local, and you do.
No, if you are one of the billion-dollar corporations that own most of the radio stations in America, you can't do it local. One, these ownership groups are not based here. And the reality is if you have 300, 400, 500 radio stations, you have to run them from 30,000 feet. And that means that you can't do a lot of the things that we can do. A good example that something that we do is we partner with Akron General Cleveland Clinic on something called Bosom Buddies every year during Cancer Awareness Month. And WQMX works on that project, and we do a series of events, mostly musical events, concerts, and we raise money to donate to their program called Muffins for Mammograms. And the program provides free mammograms to those who can't afford them because they're not cheap. Too many people don't have health insurance, and mammograms are one of the best ways to identify breast cancer before it's a problem. And the more people we can get tested, the more people we can save. And so that would be an example of something that we do. We could do a generic cancer awareness something or other and deliver a check to the American Cancer Society, and it would go to Washington, D.C., and who knows what they would use it for.
Right.
But here we're using it for something that is coming back to our community, or rather the dollars are staying in our community, and we can see the results directly right on the ground here in town. That's important.
It is. It's a local community involvement radio station. So let's go back to the evolution of Rubber City Radio Group, because two other stations that we bill as Akron stations also become part of your group and also very much community oriented. And that's when you acquired WONE and WAKR.
Yeah. 1993. Took me a minute to remember. But we had an opportunity to purchase WONE and WAKR. At the time, there were two other stations for sale in Akron as well, and we thought about which one we thought we had the better future with. And WAKR just rang true for me because it has such a long history of service to this community. It went on the air in 1941, and the Burke family who founded the company really had a commitment to the local community, and that was something that I felt was important and something that we could latch onto and be able to spread our wings with. And so WAKR and WONE were the decision we made.
When you look at those two radio stations, one, you've got WAKR, and you mentioned the heritage, and then WONE is classic rock radio that certainly gives back to our listeners when you look at WONE. Talk about staying live and local. Let's go with WONE.
Well, if you listen to stations around the country, classic rock is an easy one to find. There's a classic rock station in almost every city. And if you start paying attention, you discover that they play the same 300 records. That's all they do. And then if you pay even more attention, you'll find that the morning show is probably local, but everything else on the air is canned. And it could be a disc jockey in Chicago who is appearing on 6 radio stations simultaneously through the miracle of the internet. And from those big companies' point of view, they can do a midday show on 6 radio stations for one salary, and which means they can run a lot cheaper. And when you have 400 radio stations, that's what you're trying to do. You've got Wall Street to answer to, and you've got a different set of priorities that we don't have to worry about.
The business model that you set up in Rubber City Radio is also a little bit different. You mentioned some of the bigger radio companies. They're flying way above their local communities, but your business model is not only local, but it's also a belief still in doing promotions for the community, whether it's raising dollars or general promotions. And a lot of the bigger conglomerate companies are kind of pushing that side away. You still believe in a promotions department, getting out in front of the listeners and shaking hands. So I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about staying steady with your business model.
In Northeast Ohio, Northeast Ohio, we have the pleasure of having one of the great music venues, an outdoor venue in Blossom Music Center. Very few other cities have such a thing. Bigger cities don't have them as nice, if they have them at all. And we happen to have a wonderful venue in Blossom. It used to be, back in the days when all the radio stations were local, if you went to a rock concert, you would see every rock and roll radio station, right by the bridge as you go into the center. And there's several stations up in Cleveland. They would all be there, and they would be meeting and greeting all the audiences as they came in. And what's happened is, in the last few years, as they've cut down on those promotion staffs, those street teams, there's nobody there. Today, if you go into Blossom Music Center, you'll see one of my stations and nobody else. If it's a country show, you'll see WQMX. If it's a rock show, you'll see WONE. If it's a modern rock show, you'll see 107.3. And even WAKR occasionally shows up for some of the dinosaur acts. I shouldn't call it that. The soft oldies kind of acts.
Yeah.
If the Eagles were to show up at Blossom Music Center, WAKR would be there.
Thom Mandel is with us on Horner's Corner. He is the owner GM of the Rubber City Radio Group, and To Tom, to many people, what you said, you'll still see your stations at the top of the hill in Blossom Music Center. Some other companies might say, you know what, we're just going to pull on that back on that as well. But again, to your business model, you're a firm believer on getting out in front of the public and letting the stations, letting the community, I should say, see your radio stations.
Yeah. If there's a community event, we try to have somebody there. The city did a 200th anniversary thing at the Civic a couple of weeks ago, and there were representatives of the radio station there. We thought it was important. That was, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people were there that night.
Right.
And out of a community of close to 500,000, that doesn't sound like a lot. But those people talk to people, and those people talk to people, and because we participate in those kinds of things, people know who we are. Our listeners know who you are. Our listeners know who all of our other personalities are. They may not know all of the personalities, but they'll know some of them. And we try to get everybody out as much as we can because it's important to be part of the community and to participate in what I'll describe as community events. And we do radio station promotional nights with the Rubber Ducks. Ken Babby is a wonderful partner and a very committed owner. Even though he's not from Akron, he has adopted Akron as a second home. And he's here all the time, and he's a wonderful partner.
When I was thinking of inviting Tom to Horner's Corner, the month of December is what stood out to me because I imagine, Tom, the month of December as the owner of the River City Radio Group and the general manager, when you see WQMX with the Tree of Lights, when you see WAKR with the Salvation Army, when you see WONE with the Valor Homes, it really puts the stamp on your belief in leading this radio station company. You had to, and you're not the type of guy that's out front in the lobby doing that, but in your office, I imagine you had to be really pleased to see how that unfolds each and every December from your company.
Tree of Lights celebrated its 20th year this season, and every year it seems like we raise more money than the year prior. And that's wonderful. We get Santa Claus to come out, and we often have had reindeer in the parking lot.
Yes, we do.
Those lights on the front of the building on West Market Street have become a landmark in the neighborhood. People expect them to be there, and for those people viewing who aren't familiar with it, we sell the lights. So that if you come and you buy a light, that's another light that's lit on the front of the building. And the reality is there's about $16,000 worth of lights. We raise over twice that. So people will often, they'll buy a light, but they'll hand us a $20 bill. And all the money goes to charity, as you mentioned, and it stays here in the community. We always have focused on local programs to support.
When you look at, and you mentioned it's been 30 years now that you've been owner of radio stations, actually 30 years plus. When you look at radio getting ready to head into 2025, compared to when you got into the radio business late 80s, early 90s, what's been the biggest change for you as an owner of a radio station company?
Well, the biggest change affecting radio is that in the last 10 years, our ears have a lot more choices.
Yeah.
There are various internet supplied services like Pandora and Spotify. There are online radio stations that you can listen to. There are podcasts. That's an area that never used to exist. The New York Times does an excellent news podcast every night called The Daily that They pick a story, and they spend a half hour on it. And it's always interesting, and you can find it on the New York Times app on your phone, or you can find it a number of other ways. But that's an example of the kinds of competition we have today that we didn't have 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Happily, I look at the ratings, and we have just as many people listening to us as ever. But it's different now, because it used to be if you turned off one of my radio stations, you probably went to another radio station, or you got home and you went to the TV. But now there's thousands of other opportunities that you can dial away to. And so while we still have all the ears, we're sharing them more with other media. And it's a challenge. It forces us to get better, and that's good, because if we get better, that's better for our listeners. And we can also create podcasts, not too different from this one. And we can rerun programming. You can hear the best of WONE's morning show. And we can repurpose stuff, and people who maybe weren't able to listen to something when it was aired can find it later. And if you do an interview with Mayor Malik, somebody can hear it later on from the website, and you might have spent an hour with the mayor, and we used 10 minutes of it on the air, and that listener can find the whole hour and hear everything that the mayor had to say. And that's something that the modern internet access has given us that we didn't have before.
Yeah, there's a lot, isn't there, Tom, where you taketh away, but in some parts radio giveth as well, because there are other opportunities when we talk about the advent of websites where people can go back and listen and see the product, the pictures, the videos, the audio. Some of those things that you and I grew up with radio may have disappeared, but other doors have opened.
Yeah. One of the things that the internet has provided is that you can hear us all over the world.
Yeah.
American servicemen stationed in the Middle East who are from the Akron area can still listen to WQMX on their phones, on their base, wherever that happens to be. They might be in Germany, they might be in Israel, they might be in Syria, they might be in Iraq, but they can hear us. And it's a little bit of home.
It is. It's in. With us is Thom Mandel. He is the owner, general manager of the Rubber City Radio Group, WONE, WQMX, WAKR, and Alt Cleveland 107.3. And you were talking about different choices, Tom, but you and I both look at numbers quite a bit, and we still notice that the majority of people in vehicles that are still listening to music, radio is still their number one choice as far as bringing in their entertainment and their music.
If you're driving in your car, radio, AM and FM radio are still the easiest choices. If you're going to go to a podcast or one of the other services, it's clumsy. And, you're not going to dig your phone out of your pocket to find something that you can feed through the dashboard. Unless you have a fairly new car, you're going to have to be plugging that phone into a cord, so that you can hear it through decent speakers, not that little teeny tiny speaker that's on the phone. And so AM and FM radio still become the first choice in the car. And that's important, because that's one of the biggest places that people have always listened to radio. If you think back when we were all teenagers driving around in the car, the soundtrack was the radio.
Yeah.
And it still continues to be the soundtrack of our lives when we're in our car. And, that gets us to some of the modern manufacturers who are starting to take AM out of the cars. And they say it's all about interference and people don't listen anymore, and that's not true. And plus, AM radio is the backbone of our emergency alert system. Even if you get your alert on your phone, chances are it still came from a radio station somewhere. The backbone of the EAS system is 80 radio stations. 70 of them are AM stations. And that's the system that can get an emergency notice across the country within seconds. And that's also the test that you hear from time to time with all the funny noises. But, that's the government making sure that it still works. And we test it every week on every radio station to make sure that you can get your emergency information. And if AM gets removed from cars, then AM radio stations are going to be at risk of going dark if people can't listen to them.
And then where do they get the emergency signals to help them if something indeed happens?
Yeah. All of the things that are in your car are not free media. AM and FM radio are still free media. And that's part of the reason that the automobile manufacturers are looking for ways to move away from it. Because if you sign up for satellite radio, well, General Motors and Ford get a cut. Mm-hmm. That's a continuing profit spot for them. And they would rather you listen to satellite and they get paid than to listen to AM and FM radio where they don't get paid. And a paid Spotify account or a paid Pandora account. Of all the manufacturers, General Motors is the one who's the most open about it. They want to get rid of Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and they want to replace it with their own platform. And if you have a General Motors car with that new General Motors online platform, you're going to have to pay them to have Pandora in the car. And you're going to have to pay them for these syndicated services. And that will become a significant part of their income revenue stream, is those subscriptions, just like cable at home.
Yeah. Thom has been a general manager of a radio company for over 30 years. He's also a general manager, and I know this firsthand, that more days than not, he still gets up in the morning, he still comes into the office, opens up the door, and goes in. He's not a stay-at-home general manager. And I throw that out there, Thom, because this is obviously never worn on you. I don't want to say living a dream again, but you love the world of radio and knowing you firsthand, and it's never gotten old for you.
I'm actually having fun. We put Alt Cleveland on the air a couple of years ago as a new format, and as you know, it may be not apparent to everybody who listens, there's nobody on the air who's over the age of 40. And they are teaching me as much as I'm teaching them. And it's fun.
It is.
It's fun working with these kids.
I agree 100%. Well, listen, hopefully you've enjoyed Horner's Corner. We wanted to have Thom come on because the month of December, there's a lot of caring. There's a lot of giving by you, but there's also a lot of giving by our local media. And Thom is an owner of a radio station company that still believes in community involvement, live and local, and really giving back to the community where his company is when you talk about the Rubber City Radio Group. Thom, thanks for joining us this month.
Thank you. One last comment.
Yes.
Congress is looking at a legislation to keep AM in the cars. Tell your congressman you want AM radio in your car.
That's a perfect way to end. Thanks, Thom. Thom Mandel, owner, general manager of the Rubber City Radio Group, joining us this month on Horner's Corner for WAOH.TV, for 93.5, for 1590 WAKR. I'm Ray Horner.